All right, podcast fans. Welcome to episode 12 of Totum Realty Podcast. And it is a awesome 12th one because we have our first guest today.
Woo.
Woohoo!
I'm your first guest?
First guest.
Wow.
Yeah, Brian Dolan, the president of Discovery. We'll let him talk about that a little bit here in a few minutes, but excited to have you here.
Thank you.
I feel like he made a post on LinkedIn a little bit more than a month ago maybe, and it felt like it was a agenda for a podcast. It seemed perfect. And he starts off this post by saying, what are you assuming will absolutely be the situation in the future that might not actually be so? And then goes on to talk about a few things that we'll get into. And the topic of the day that we're going to dig into, or the current event, is they just announced that the cost of raising a child from birth through high school has gone up 33% in the last 5 years. So in 2017, it was $233,000 plus or minus, and in 2022, it's $310,000. So if you had a baby 5 years ago, and
which I did.
Oh, perfect, perfect, and you were an accountant,
depressing for you.
in an accountant mindset, and you thought you were only going to have to figure out $233,000, and they got to kindergarten, and someone told you it was going to be $310,000. What you thought was going to be the case might not actually be so. So, welcome.
Thank you.
Maybe a little bit about Discovery, and then what you think about this change of expenses in raising children.
So Discovery, it is a technology that allows brokerage companies, not your kind of world, but in the waste and recycling world, the ability to automate their AR and AP processes. A lot of the world that exists today is Excel or Google Sheets or some sort of hauler software that's converted to sort of maybe do a little bit of what we need, but we have a lot of manual work. And so we built this software officially over the past 5 years, but it sort of had roots all the way back as far as 2015. And it really brings the AP and AR processes within minutes of each other. So you can do a much more efficient process. You can automate a lot more. And we've got customers who are going from processing a couple thousand invoices a month with a handful of people, so say 5,000 invoices with 4 people, to using 1.5 people, 2 people to do the same work, and they do it in a shorter amount of time, and their cash flow is faster, and they can answer questions better, and I could ramble. I'll let Michael do that later.
So,
I do have some general questions because I know nothing about
I've heard
the
that
waste
about you, Paige. Don't worry.
Yeah, nothing about anything. I'm just here to ask the questions. But what? You're on Michael's team. I knew it. When you say your customers, so who? First of all, I didn't know until I looked at your website again today, refreshing for this moment, that there were even brokers in waste management. So if you could explain that interface, and then who in the process your customers are.
So there's a couple of varieties of what I'd call brokers in our space. There's straight up brokers who make a margin on a vendor cost to their customer, right? So there's 3 parties in that triangle. There's people who are more cost auditors. There's people who come from a management standpoint where they might be charging just a flat fee. There's shared savings people. So there's different business models, and so our software has to account for all of that. So it's a little fun that way. But those companies, I was actually updating the list today. There's between 250 and 300 of them in the U.S. and Canada. There's not a lot of them, right?
Okay.
But some of them are really big. 2 of them are public. Rubicon Technologies out of Kentucky. It's led by a guy named Nate Morris. He just took that public through a SPAC deal last week, maybe. And then there's another company called Quest Resource Holding that is maybe out of Texas. They've been public for a little bit longer. And so it's kind of interesting that there's 2 public companies now in this space. You can go read their information and understand things about them. And so I have a lot of fun doing that. I won't bore your audience with all the details of that, but they disclose a lot of information that's very interesting to understand from my position trying to build software for that space.
Okay, so those are the brokerage.
Yeah. And then I
companies.
completely
Okay.
forgot what you asked as the follow-up
Well,
question.
and then
the
who
client is.
would your customers be?
Those groups.
Those are your customers,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then they interface with the larger waste management companies
So
that
they-
we would hear about.
Yeah, so they
like
work with all the things from like a Vogel to a Castriota, all the way up to a Waste Management, and then their customers are, these type of buildings we're in today here at Gateway, all the way to small churches or grocery stores or things like that. All of any place that has trash, right? And the beauty of the way the trash world works is everybody thinks of real estate is this super unique thing, and it is. Except for when you walk out the back to a loading dock or out the back door or something, it's very similar, right? Go around the back of any mall, it's very similar. Go around the back of any place in Squirrel Hill or the Strip District, they're pretty similar, right? So there's different varieties, of course, but there's a trash bin,
a
there's a
dumpster,
process that gets it.
a dumpster.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So we don't disclose who our customers are because it's sort of a low trust industry, and it's actually cost us a few deals along the way because people were hesitant early on with our technology, and so I just said, okay, that's fine. I'm not going to build my company off the back of our customers. So
Right.
it's kind of fun that way because no one knows anything about us.
How big is the trash industry?
Depending on how you measure it, it's 40 billion plus. So that's
And-
not our target.
Everybody has it.
Everybody has it, and it's not going away.
No, it is not going away, and it's
Right.
constantly produced.
It's
And growing.
What people don't realize most of all is that the waste, I was in your kitchen a little bit ago, and there's 3 different things for things, and this is an unpopular opinion, but the reality is that most of the waste that is produced is actually not produced by you or I at home. Most of the waste that is produced by some sort of industry, process, something. Depends on what it is. I've been in different facilities all throughout the country, and the larger things you can think of, from your grocery stores to your discount stores to all those kinds of things, they produce a certain amount of stuff, but a lot of it's cardboard. That actually has a process to it. But a lot of the production somewhere further up the chain that actually makes the thing that you
cup.
consume, that produces a lot of waste. And so by weight, a lot of it's in that environment. What you and I do is a small portion of the world.
Yeah. The impact that it has on me is I'm in the getting rid of it part of it with the properties that I have in West Virginia, and we spend about $2,000 a month on trash, just taking stuff away,
Yep.
the dumpsters and everything like that, and it's never ending. And the part that I find kind of irritating, other than the whole thing about paying a bill, is
Other than everything.
No, it's just the constant increases and the lack of the ability to deal with these guys. It's just like talking to the guy who picks up your trash. You don't get a lot of what I would call customer service regarding.
Well,
that.
that's not his job.
Right.
Probably not.
Right. He's good at his job, which is
Yeah.
being on time with the truck, being safe, doing his job, right?
And taking
there
it
were
away.
3 trash truck rollover, tip over, crash incidents in the last couple weeks here in Western PA. So that job can be dangerous because it's a 50,000-pound truck barreling down the road, and he's relying on some guy who was doing the brakes and maintaining it in the shop. So it's a different job, but the customer service part that you refer to is more tied to, which comes back to this thing you brought up about costs, is more tied to the fact that there's a lot of regulation that goes on in that world, and then there's a lot of pressure on that world around drivers. So the average age of the drivers, I don't remember it offhand, but it's been steadily increasing, and they have shortages of drivers and all these things. So it's not completely unreasonable that their costs are rising. But the challenge the consumer has is there's not an Expedia or something or Kayak to help you go out there and go, where do I find this thing? Where do I find pricing for this? What's the real price should be?
I didn't even know it was negotiable. I thought it was just like you pay.
Depends
what
on where you
pay.
are.
Depends
Sometimes
on
it
where you
is,
are.
sometimes it's not.
In certain communities, there's only one hauler.
Yeah.
So
if you go to-
larger industrial users, they based on how much they produce. Like, do they get volume discounts
Sometimes, yeah.
or
Yeah.
if it's a shopping mall user, they can negotiate a national contract through a brokerage.
Yeah, so
Learn
What's a
something new every day.
big shopping mall?
Like Simon.
Simon has
Properties.
its own deal with national providers, or they have each individual location strike their own deal, but they bounce it off somebody in their main office who knows what the price should be, right? So
Right.
it's done different ways, but volume matters, right? And then there's the whole the who you paid off at the city, wink wink, nudge nudge type of thing. And I say that tongue in cheek, but it's sort of true, because if you ever looked at, I want to say it's one of the cities in West Virginia, and I'm going to blank on it, but if you look at the map, it's this, right? So if you're on this side of the street, you have city services, prices are defined. If you're on this side of the street, you don't have city services, prices are undefined. And so this side of the street will be $1,800 a month, and this side will be $3,700. What's the difference? Same hauler. The difference is you're not in the city map,
Yeah.
right?
In Morgantown, there's only one hauler. Okay, whereas I believe where I live in Cheat Lake, there's 3 or 4 options.
Right.
In Parkersburg.
And do you see the cost difference then?
Par-
Do you see the cost difference then?
Not really, because one is commercial, one is residential, and so that I'm throwing
Apples and
away, I'm
oranges.
throwing away a barrel of goods here, whereas I have dumpsters that get picked up 3 or 4 times a week.
Yep.
And the one in Parkersburg, there's 4 haulers, but they're all owned by the same company, which I find to be very incredibly interesting.
But that all feeds back into the topic you guys brought up of why does it cost so much to raise a kid? There is a ongoing. So I'm a bit of a history nerd in some ways. If you go back and look at Eisenhower's complaint about the military-industrial complex in the 50s, that whole thing has continued unabated since, right? And whether it's military-industrial, however you look at it, there is a consistent element of higher costs throughout the past 70 years, unabated. I can't think of too many things that have been driven down other than computer costs, right? Those have come down. So
Televisions.
yeah, to me that's computer
technology.
costs,
Yeah,
technology
yeah.
costs.
That's the word.
But all these services type things have been driven up, because of what I just look at as additional regulation and sort of market inefficiencies that go on. And that's why I look at it over the 70 years, because it's not a political thing, left, right, up, down. It's everybody's done it, right?
Regulation, litigation, and then the overall effect of the rest of the economy on those particular industries.
Right. Well, I have family members who are lawyers, and I enjoy needling them sometimes because I go, so how do you guys get rid of the trial bar? Well, why do you bring this up? Because it costs me money. How do you know it costs you money? Because I can see it. Someone files a lawsuit for this, they settle it for that. Later on, you have to sign a form. You have to do a thing. You can't do that anymore, right? And you just see that time and time again throughout society, and that adds costs. So that's the fun part about our technology is we're trying to drive down that cost.
Well, going back to the litigation component, the entire system is built for that. It's built to be settled.
Yeah,
Law is built never to go to court.
ideally
to
not.
get to the yes.
Yeah, because then it's faster, cheaper, simpler, and
It's-
less risk.
Well, it goes back into the risk component. It's
Right.
less risk because no one knows the outcome that can be really bad. So I'll take the outcome that's just bad.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The
sign
bad
it.
and known is
It's the
better
known
than
knowns versus the known unknowns.
unknown and potentially
Yeah.
worse.
Settling for $1 million versus having the risk of a $10 million, malpractice suit, right? But then you're not allowed to have whatever it is as care somehow later because they're afraid of that same situation happening again. Right.
And then the other part that you touched on was the regulation component, which changes constantly.
That's the fun part about the space we were in, and the space we're in now. There's not much regulation around technology and waste. There's a lot of regulation
mean
around
in
landfill.
waste?
Yeah, so a lot
Okay.
of regulation around landfill,
Right.
hauling, all these things. There's not a lot of regulation around what technology can I use to manage my business process. There's none. It's a wonderful place to be.
Yeah. So, Paige, the topic of the day, 5 years ago. Well, I guess I should set the stage. Father of 2 children.
2.
Father of 4 children. Father of
7.
lots of children.
I want to move to that side of the table now.
I can do math really quick. 7 times 300 is a big number.
Yeah.
But, if it were to go up another 33%, in 5
Selling
years.
Paige one.
Yeah, exactly. I'm serious. I want to hear her perspective. That would put the bill at 410 if it went up 33% more in 5 years.
So I have a different perspective on this. Whose responsibility is to raise the child?
The parents.
the parents.
Okay. How much of that responsibility have we deferred to the government?
I have no idea. I can't wait to hear
Yes,
where
you
this
do.
is going.
Well,
Well, it's a start. Okay. When you get health care today, do more people get health care in ACA things, or do they get it from their business, or do they buy it themselves in some way?
but even under that scenario, how much of the healthcare industry is controlled by the government?
Right, but just play along. I'll
Okay,
walk you through it.
I'll
Most healthcare is either
A lot.
through your business
Yeah.
or through a government
ACA.
ACA thing, right? Okay, so then you have a child. Okay, so now you get a couple weeks off from work. Oh, the government dictates that, right? So I, as an employer, have to provide you a certain amount of time off for a different thing. I can come up with something beyond that, but I have to provide a certain amount. Okay, so then you go back
Isn't
to
it
work.
like 3 months and then another 3 months if they want it?
No, I think it's,
It's 12 weeks unpaid.
Okay.
This is for what, having a child?
Yeah.
This is,
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
FML.
FMLA.
Yeah.
And so then you go back to work. You want to put your child in daycare. Well, who dictates what the daycares can be? Because in DC, you now have to have a college degree to run a daycare. So does that raise
Only in
prices?
DC?
Yes, only in DC. Everything in DC is probably only in DC.
For the
Well,
time
then-
being.
Oh, I don't know whether that's, I think there's other states that have the same kind of restriction.
They might, but my point in raising it is it's a
Okay.
recent thing.
All right.
And so, but does that raise prices for daycare or lower prices for daycare?
Raises
Raises
instantly.
prices for daycare, right? So then, okay, so now we've got daycare. Your kid goes to school then, kindergarten, first grade, those type of things. Oh, we expanded Head Starts. Your kid can go to that early. Who pays for all that? Who pays for the school? Who pays for all those things? Those are all things that you're paying taxes for that then go to the government for them to inefficiently turn around and give back to you. Okay? And so my preface, or my point, excuse me, is whose responsibility is to raise the child? As a society, we've de facto delegated the responsibility to raise the child over to the government.
And
Okay.
therefore
Well, do you
driving the
think-
cost.
But
And
do you
therefore
think
driving
it's,
the cost.
do you think that's us de facto turning the responsibility back over to them, or do you think that's just how societies function? Like, you know, I
Yes,
do.
rich societies end up doing that because they find out that they can borrow money from the future to bring value to themselves today and go, we'll figure it out later. It's happened time and again.
See, and I don't disagree with you, but I also think that as a society, we have to raise like the common denominator of the like the care people are getting, or the like certain people
I agree.
can't afford to send their kids to these, or could only afford to send their child to the least expensive option, which is where there's not professionals running the daycare, and if it's not regulated, like how bad could that get to
Well,
where
that's-
it would be the only thing that they could afford?
And that's where we'll come into substantive disagreement is the definition of regulated and professionals. Because my son John, who's now 13, he had a really great line one time. I forget the exact details of it. My wife remembers better. But he said, well, Mom, who's going to watch us? And she goes, well, I am. He goes, but you don't have a certificate. At the time, she was like,
Show me your
13-year-old
credentials,
son
lady.
said-
no, at the time he was probably 7 or something. And we had 4
That's
kids or something.
hysterical.
And he's
I'm
like,
sure
you don't have a
Allie loved
certificate, right? And she still references it today. Yeah. But this comes back. I'm making a joke about my point though, which is I understand the inclination is to say, okay, how do we make sure that we have a baseline of safety of different things, and how do we make sure we're rising the tide of all boats, right? And as a intention, that's a great intention. As a reality, it's super difficult to do from a central planning standpoint, right? And central planning always leads to a higher cost for that. And the best way to do it is to delegate that decision down to, okay, let that mother pick the solution that's best for her, right? Because as you and I both know, dads are going to come up with decisions that are maybe slightly different than moms, and dad's probably going to defer to mom most of the time because he's smart. And moms have a pretty good intuition about where they're going to put their that's cost effective for them, time effective, all those different things, versus I have to put them in this thing that checks this box because I get this money from the government, right? It's a different approach, and so we've gotten so far away from that that's why I think these costs are rising.
I have to interject. It's a little bit off topic, but your comment about deferring to mom over the weekend, somebody said to me, and it's just hysterical, that you can't earn points with mom. You can only lose less points.
I don't agree with that. I don't
with
agree
your
with that.
decision making. And I almost fell off my seat. I was like, that's very insightful.
That makes mom a bad guy.
direction,
Mom's not a
was
bad
that
guy.
directed at the husband or the children? 'Cause
No, it was a husband.
Michael's his brain's chewing over here.
No, I see what you, but you're deferring to the fact that this is the way we've done it, so this is the way that it is. It has not always been that way.
Oh, I understand it hasn't always been that way, but it's been
Yeah.
that way for 60 plus years.
I would say 60 years ago, it wasn't anywhere near as bad as it is today.
It wasn't near as pervasive as it was today. Yes, I agree with that.
Okay, maybe I might buy into that argument. I mean, public education, which is what most people partake in, it's
Yeah, but
because
that doesn't impact this cost at all.
I bet 1/3 of that
Well,
cost.
what's in
I think
here
it-
is
put in there.
housing, food, clothing, healthcare, childcare. So
You
I
mean
think
that's
Public
education?
education's free.
public education,
Education is not free.
It's
Public
free to the
education-
mom and dad, though.
It's not
Yeah.
free. They pay taxes. Okay, each child comes
pay
attached
taxes
with
yeah,
with
but
$600.
whether you have a kid or not, you're paying that tax.
Yeah, so in the 310, there's no cost for
Okay,
public
so
education.
I'm just trying to do the math on this thing. So where is the bulk of that money?
bulk of that money, it says here, 18%. Food is the second most expensive item when raising a child. 18% of the total cost since original calculation.
The number one is housing.
Number one is probably housing.
Yeah, it's housing and food.
Housing and food are a big part.
And
Clothing
then
would
clothes
be a
and
big
then
part. Healthcare, childcare.
So what does it cost to clothe a child from?
It doesn't break down that level.
I didn't have that.
And I knew
Michael
we
wants to know
were-
where they're shopping.
But Michael, to your point.
Not
to
at
your point,
Target.
the cost of clothing, okay? So clothing became a worldwide sourced good, right? Used to be, I can look back at my mother saves too many things. Anybody else's mother do that too? Is it a
Yes.
Pittsburgh thing? You extend it all the way to Cleveland?
There you go. It's all the way to Cleveland.
I have T-shirts from when I was a kid, and they were made in Hong Kong, okay? Everything my kids get is probably made in China anymore, right? But you can find, Sri Lanka, different things. And the reason those got outsourced was it became too expensive to make something here, right? And there's different reasons for that. But that factor of, okay, why has it gotten more expensive? All those different components went to go find places to make them more cheaply while retaining a certain amount of quality. And we've run out of places to go make things more cheaply, right? And so those rising tides that are lifting all boats are moving some of these things up. So you have to find efficiencies to create them. That's where you need capital to invest in technology.
Well, okay, all right. There's a couple of
I went
points
down a
in
road
there.
Oh boy,
Okay,
we're going.
so-
We gotta get to the. We actually
No,
gotta
the-
get to
the-
the meat of today's
No, the
topic.
first part is okay.
So welcome to our first
the
4-hour
rising tide,
podcast.
increasing is the devaluation of the dollar. Okay, so
The cost of inflation
okay,
is
so-
also part of it, yep.
Okay, so you take 60 years, $300,000 60 years ago. How much money was that? Was that 60? Was it 70?
So I did an interesting thing the other day. I took the price of a stamp for a post I want to make later. I'm giving it away to anybody who watches this podcast. But the price of a stamp from 19...
Government controlled, by the way, so
Yes.
that's
But still-
probably not the best benchmark to use.
No, but it's interesting. It's from 1917 through now. There's a chart online of every price increase in stamps. And I used just a simple little thing online to put it into today's dollars. And it averages somewhere between 48 cents and 63 cents the whole time, right? It bounces up and down. It only went down once in the past, 40 years.
That's tying it to the cost of inflation.
today's dollar.
inflation.
Yeah.
Okay, today's dollar, okay.
It only went down once when it went down from 47 to 46 cents or something like that in 2016, I think it was, for a year. It went down by a penny. And so I don't know what the difference in the 300,000 now versus then would be. But I think that the challenge when you have all these big statistics is that what are you putting into them, right? And so the thing is, if you bought a computer in 1985, a personal home computer, you paid a fortune versus what you would pay today for the quality of what that was versus what you get today, right? So it's sort of tough to match those things apples to apples.
But as Kevin said, though, that's the one thing that technology is the cost is always driven down. That's a whole other part of the discussion. But my metric is the loaf of bread Volkswagen metric, not the stamp. But it's the same thing. Okay, when I was a kid, a loaf of bread was 19 cents and a Volkswagen was $1,900. Well, today a loaf of bread is $2.79 and a Volkswagen you get one for $27,000. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. I don't know. But that at
Probably.
the time that I used the analogy, that's where it was.
Yeah.
The loaf of bread didn't get any better. In fact, it probably got worse. And the car didn't get any better. It probably got worse. But the cost of the dollar was just kept on losing all of its value.
It's the hidden
So-
tax.
Yeah, I'll give you that part.
All right, so Paige, what's your final thought on this before we move into the meat of where today's conversation is headed? Does it make you want to throw up?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yes. I don't know how. Like, I mean, 7 children in today's world. I feel like you hear of that so seldom because just the sheer expense. I mean, I know people who always wanted to have large families, but them large families now is 3, max 4 children.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my parents and my parents' parents, 5, like they all had 5 children, 7 children.
Right.
My grandparents, I think, had like 13 and 9 in their family, and that's, you can't. I mean, if you adjusted that to inflationary guidelines, I still think it would be an enormous increase proportionally now what it costs
I think
to what it takes to raise a children. So,
But the standard has also risen in that time. The expectations have risen. You know, when you were a child, a Nintendo and a Razor scooter and all these different things weren't necessary.
They didn't have them.
They didn't have them and weren't necessary.
Okay, so you had, when I was a kid,
my parents hired a babysitter for $6 an hour that chain smoked the whole day. She
Yeah.
watched us. I mean,
when I was a kid,
I'd call
minimum
that
wage
progress.
was $1.08.
Progress. Right.
So it's like you can't, it's just a completely different animal.
New York Times, 1981. The best minimum wage is $0. My point to
I agree.
to the podcast is over the 70 years that I'm talking about, the society as we have it has fallen in love with the concept of using debt from today, borrowing from the future to finance a lifestyle we can't afford. And so, to your point of, why don't people have these families anymore? Because we borrowed from my grandkids' future to pay for today's things. So if we wanted to get back to the society that we think we should have and want to have, and we pay lip service to, we have to make hard decisions now to do those things, but there's not the political will to do those things.
We also didn't have the distractions back then that you have today.
Not in the same form.
Not in the same form, but it's just a different kind of life. You don't have you had more kids because you did more things with your kids. Okay, now you have more kids. You got to take them to here. You got to take them to there. You got to schlep them all around there.
I can tell you, as a father of 7, though, you get to choose one sport.
But as a child of 6,
Yeah.
you didn't have to choose one sport. You could do whatever you wanted. It's just that your parents didn't cart you to those places.
Because you could walk places.
You could walk places and
Or
you
ride
go
your
there.
bike.
You could ride your bike.
We could talk
You
about
get
zoning
there.
if you want.
No. All right. So
also, because I'm going to catch so much heat for this, I'd just like to let the record show I'm joking. My mom didn't hire a chain smoking babysitter to watch us.
Sorry, Mom.
Because my dad's hip to the pod now. I don't want to get lectured for
Wow.
painting a bad picture.
To the
hip to the
pod.
pod.
Okay.
So
Right.
the transition, which I think is an interesting one, is if it costs $300,000 per kid, you need to make money, in theory, to raise children. And your post on LinkedIn was all about risk and investing, and really interested to dig into it. But give us a little color on your philosophy on how do you take practical risk in order to try to deal with the fact that in round numbers you've got $2.1 million of expense that's growing every single day.
Yeah. So practical risk. So the beauty of risk is you can measure it. Not perfectly, but you can measure it. And if anybody at my company listens to this, they will laugh because I am not a spreadsheet wizard by any means. But you can take a measure of a couple of different factors. You can take a measure of the person behind the role, behind the thing you're looking at, and see, do they have a history of any success? You can use other factors around it. There's a guy I used to study named Mike Parker. He came and taught us in Montana when I was doing real estate sales out there. And he had three things he looked at in real estate. It was location, concept, and timing. And he had this great little speech of, everybody says location, location, location. He goes, it's all crap. It's location, concept, and timing. And I sort of have pilfered that and applied it to investing because location matters. If you buy the wrong side of the street, even if you have the right concept and timing, your location's bad. Right? And the same thing can apply when you look at even investments in stocks or other financial instruments, because if you look at location as the stock, the concept is, okay, where's this thing going? Your timing, sometimes timing's not in your control. Sometimes you have the money. Oh, it's raining.
It is definitely
really raining.
It's really raining.
Sounds like Gateway's about to
Sometimes
blow
you
over.
have control over the timing. You can apply it. But other times, if you're doing a 1031 or something, you got to apply the money in a certain amount of days. You don't have a choice.
Right.
It's got to happen. So from my standpoint, it's sometimes about just sitting back, measuring the thing, getting comfort level with where it's going to go, and then to the point about the 10-year thing, looking at, okay, how could this go right and how could this go really wrong, right? Because take, for example, I have a friend who is in the computer world, and he told me, I want to say more than 10 years ago, that in 5 years we'd all be driving self-driving cars, because look at how fast we converted from horses to horseless carriages in the Henry Ford era. And I told him, I said, you are so wrong. I said, you don't understand how hard it is. I know you're making the chips, but you do understand, but you seem to not understand how hard it is to get through the snowstorm in a self-driving car.
Right.
Because even with LiDAR and all these different things, well, look, as he said, it's funny, he goes, well, we'd hand you back control then. And I said, well, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. You're going to take control of the car all the times it's sunny and nice out, and then when it pours rain like this and it's really hard to drive, you're going to give back control to somebody who hasn't driven in 3 months?
Right.
Like, that's a terrible idea. So those are the kind of things I look at and go, if I can logic through that, I'll go, I'm not investing in self-driving cars. And if you've seen it, most of them have cratered.
Yeah, I was talking to the CEO of Motional, which is Hyundai's self-driving car, and he said that you actually have self-driving cars in Vegas right now because there's no rain, and the roads are all straight and perfect. Mm-hmm. And he said,
great environment for that.
You're a few years away from being totally autonomous in a town like Vegas. Pittsburgh is like 25, 30 years.
Maybe.
Because of the
If
rain.
that.
He said the hardest thing that they haven't figured out is the rain, and they don't know how they're ever going to figure it out.
I'd be intrigued to figure out how they figure out snow.
Yeah.
When it covers everything and it's all white and reflective.
I think they're taking the theory that no one will be on the roads when it's snowing.
I also think that whatever numbers that we put on it, it's probably going to be faster than that because they're going to come up with something that we can't measure as a metric that is going to figure it out. But I agree, it's not ready yet, and the timing of that is not acceptable here versus acceptable in Vegas.
So self-driving cars is one thing, and it's crazy. And like your friend said, it'll be here in 5 years. It might be 30, it might be
15
40.
years later, yeah.
But I want to go back to the reason we asked you to be on, because you talked about risk and back to the whole child thing, like trying to create a revenue stream to pay for these children, and investing. And you had 3 very distinct rules for how you invest. Well, I'm going to go in reverse order because we talked a little bit about discovery. But in reverse order, and I'm intentional about this because I think most people don't get to 2 and 1.
Uh-huh.
I think most people get stuck on your last piece, which is you spend all of your work energy on something that you're a subject matter expert on. Like
Try to be, yeah.
Yeah, right? So you use...
It's easy when I'm in a field of 1.
Well, I think you're being a little silly on that.
No, there's no other technology like ours. So it's fun when you're in a field of 1.
Well, so, fair enough. But you're in a technology space where there's always going to be disruptors and people trying to eat your lunch, right? So you spend that energy to collect the paycheck, but that's only one piece of your three-headed approach, right?
Right.
And did you always know that you would focus on that one first, or were you thinking about 1 and 2? And 1 and 2 in your world is investing in the stock market,
Yeah.
but using a professional, which we can talk about a little bit, and then investing in other humans,
Yeah.
which presumably means other companies that need capital or real estate or whatever the case may be.
Right.
So, in reverse order, like when did you know you had to switch from just your job to looking at 1 and 2?
I think when I moved back here from Montana, so if I give a backstory on that real quick, moved back here from Montana in 2011. At about the same time, the company that we owned then went bankrupt. So there was a whole series of lessons I learned through that experience.
Sure. We might have to have you back for podcast number.
Yeah. And when I did one of the best deals of my real estate career post that experience, where someone owed me debt. I had the debt against their property. I convinced them to sell me the property. I put more money in, bought the property, put more money in, fixed the property, ran the property for a couple of years, and then sold the property for a number that was very attractive.
Okay.
Right? And did that without visiting the property once in the years I owned it. I didn't go back. I didn't need to because I had people I trusted to do the work. So that goes back to sort of that point of if you can trust certain people to do things for you, you can trust to invest in them, whether it's investing in them for them to create a return for you or investing in them to accomplish something for you, you can get outsized returns in that way.
Sure.
Right? And too many people, it's the sort of variance of it. There's a thing you can read about online about solo entrepreneurship where you create a business that's just you, that only you run, that only you are involved in. And there's people who make decent livings doing that.
Yeah.
Right? But I find it to be much more advantageous if you can look at a company and go, okay, who runs that company, right? And the beauty of today is you can follow the top 5 or 10 or 50 people in a company that's public or even a private company on LinkedIn and see a lot about them. What do they think like? Are they getting distracted by every trend that comes along, or are they focused on what they're doing? And so you can get a pretty good sense of, okay, do I want to invest in that company? Are they mission focused and actually doing what they say they're going to do? That's a distinct advantage to your point earlier. You know, we didn't have that ability 30 years ago, right?
And I mean, that's fascinating. How much, well, I guess it's a two-pronged question. How much time do you spend following those people that you trust? And not just on LinkedIn, but in whatever forms you can. And then have you had a situation where you've seen a change in that person that made you think, you know what, I'm probably not going to reinvest?
Well, I outsource the following the market to somebody who's a professional to do it because I don't think I'm smart enough. Right? I don't think I'm focused on it. I don't think I do.
You mean the
well.
stock market?
Stock market.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't do that. But in businesses I've invested in.
And do they have, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
there's so many questions, like there's so many layers of this onion. Do they have autonomy to make decisions about that investment?
Yeah.
Yeah. Up to certain thresholds?
Nope.
Nope.
Trust you to do
autonomy.
it. Go ahead. Have
Okay.
at it. So if one day all of a sudden it went all cash, I go, I guess that's what we're doing. I don't know.
Okay.
Because ultimately, if you don't give somebody the autonomy and they don't have the ability to make the decision, why are you paying them?
Right.
What's the point? I'm paying you to babysit me? I don't need that.
Sure.
I need you to do something that you think is intelligent with what you're in. And it's also having a long range view, right? Mike was talking earlier about inflation over the time period. The reason the stock market works so well is it has the ability to internalize the inflation over the long haul, right? So you can raise prices,
Right.
right? So one of the things I invested in the past few years was self-storage business because they can raise prices on the daily.
Yeah.
It's absurd.
And the
Right.
sticky customer base.
And the transient customer base,
Right.
right? The sticky base is actually interesting. You have to wait longer to raise the price on them because they have like an annual renewal or something. The guy who comes in when he moves out of his apartment and he's got a 2-week stay over until he goes to the next thing, he's your best guy.
He's the interim guy.
He fills the square and he fills it at top price.
He fills it, and then the next guy that comes in, you get more.
You can adjust
Yeah,
if you need
so
to.
you're increasing your prices 3 times within a short window.
Right.
It's Get that? And then so the diversification of the wealth management guy. It's not like you're just giving him the money and the autonomy, he goes off on his own and you call him when you retire. It's you have a metric where you can go back there and say, okay, how did we do this year?
Sure.
What did we do? So you have an ability to go back and speak with an expert with that corpus of your portfolio and say, okay, what did we do here? What did we do right? What did we do wrong?
And I measure it again. There's a lot of people who, I have some people in my network who critique me for saying, that I use somebody like that. They're like, well, why don't you just put it in an index fund? And I said, well, the problem with an index fund in my mind is what happens when the index goes down and everybody goes down and then the machine flash crashes its way to the bottom. I don't want to be there for that. I want to have selected something I think has intrinsic value over the long haul, whether I'm right or wrong. At least I made a decision, right?
Yeah.
I'd rather die on a decision than go, I don't know, the world just crushed me.
Well, whether he's right or wrong, also, he has the ability to move quickly.
Sure.
And he can adjust when he sees something coming or a question, whether, again, right or wrong,
Right.
he has the ability. He's
Right.
on site.
And what advice do you give the Pages of the world who are,
Can't wait to hear where this goes.
I think it's fair to say, stuck in the third bucket, which is just focusing on a career, and not on the first two, to how do they find that person? Like, how does Paige Myers find the person that she, whether it's $5 or $500,000, she could give them and say, I trust you, go do this.
As a financial stock type role?
Yeah, the stock role. We'll stick with that one.
Well, if you post on LinkedIn and say you're interested in it, I bet you 400 people will get you.
So
but
don't do that.
Don't do that. I would say that the way I found the best people in my career is by asking. Just ask. Ask somebody you trust who has done decently in life. What do you use, right? And I wouldn't. Some people make the mistake of asking somebody they know that has the most money. It's the wrong person to ask. You want to ask somebody who's in your network, who might have more or less money than you do, but has the right mindset you do, right? So like the person I use partially because my wife likes that person, because she's risk averse. So that's why I'm diversified the way I am, which is my risk is taken by me daily doing my job. That's where my risk is, right? She tolerates that. She said, but over there, that risk is low risk because I trust that person to not take as much risk, right? So that's a marital balance in my world.
Sure.
It's sort of knowing what you're looking for, because being distracted by the big dollar signs can lead you down a path that you don't want to go down.
Right. And then as far as diversification within your investments, you are also an investor in, like, outside of the stock market, correct?
Yeah, so individuals who were starting businesses or businesses that needed cash, or, the opportunities that came up in 2020 were 20-year opportunities. They were stupid good, and if you had cash, you'd better have invested it, because they're now worth 3-4x some of them, right? So it was a who I forget, is it Warren Buffett that says invest when everybody else is fearful, right?
Yeah.
It was exactly that, and I was in my office going, oh, okay, this is fun.
He got that phone call from me too.
Yeah.
But fortunately didn't have to go down the...
But it was a fun time, because I was
Right.
sitting there, fortunately, with some cash, and I said, okay, there's going to be people who have good businesses who just hit a patch, right?
Right.
And they need a way to get over the patch, and then, okay, great, but now you own 5-10% of something or something that pays you a 7% dividend every year. It's not a bad thing to have, right? And that's sort of been my goal, is build up things that pay you 5-7-10% dividends year over year. And if you get those, and then all of a sudden you're creating something that creates $15,000 a year in revenue to you, you're like, okay, that's nice.
But those opportunities, okay, so the 20-year opportunities come when, people are fearful. People are fearful because things are bad. Something's hit the fan at that point in time.
Right.
And so having cash is always good, because you can recognize those opportunities.
Yeah. And usually anymore, they're financial.
Yeah.
They're financial things created by the inflation things. It's all it goes
Whatever
through that whole
whatever
thing.
happened, the
Yeah.
reason was something went that they hadn't anticipated, something that you couldn't anticipate over a long period of time.
Right.
And so you had kind of answered this in your discussion about why you don't invest in index funds, but in other opportunities outside the stock market, do you do any fund investment there, or is this all individual opportunities?
I guess I don't know what that would be. The way
Like
Are you
a-
investing in like a private equity fund?
Or a
Or-
real estate fund of any type that
Not exactly. There's a company I invested in that is did a what are they called, convenience store chain in the past couple of years, and so it might be considered a fund because of the way it's structured, but to me it was, I was focusing on real estate
is
in
all
this
going
capacity.
to this one company.
Right, it's all going towards
Right.
this focus, and that
Right.
might be a fund in some terminology that the SEC cares about, but
Well, your wealth manager might also be invested in funds.
right. So for me, when I look at businesses, like Pittsburgh has a lot of small businesses, but it has a very underdeveloped investment crowd when you compare it to some of the other big markets where technology gets created. And it's interesting. I think part of that, and this is an unpopular opinion, and people don't like this, and they might not like it when I say it, but I think part of that is the fact that the state government has the, I forget what it's called now. It used to be called the Ben Franklin Innovation thing, and I forget what they call it now here in Western PA. But they give out funds to companies to help them get started, and they tout themselves as this great thing. We looked at those funds in 2011-ish when we did our company back then, and it came with this caveat that was, we are always with you. You can never get rid of us. Meaning if they gave you $50,000 to help start your company, they could invest in follow-on rounds forever.
Right.
Right? And I didn't really love the idea of having the government as my business partner for the rest of my life. And because there's that free money type of thing at the outset of a lot of companies now, there's not as much opportunity for private investors to go in and start those things because our cost of capital is higher. So I think that's reduced the amount of capital invested in companies around here. But I look for those type of companies because they can be really smart companies. There's a lot of smart bodies that come out of Pennsylvania, especially
Right.
Western PA, for manufacturing and healthcare and all these things that we do here. We've got a lot of smart brains kicking around here.
Yeah. And how are you finding those opportunities? Are those people generally finding their
Network.
way to you, or
Network, absolutely network. It's
Okay.
all people that you know who go. And I maybe it was Kevin who told me at one point. He said, "People who do deals do deals."
wise words?
Wise words. It must have been the bourbon.
His point was if you become somebody who's involved in deals, you do deals. If you're not
Kelsey, did
involved
you write
in
that
deals,
down for a
If you are an
sign?
investor, people looking for money will try to find
they'll
it.
try to find. Well, but they might. But somebody who also is an investor will say, "I heard this guy might do deals," or he knows people who do deals.
Yeah.
Right? It becomes a small circle of people. Right?
Yeah.
It was a Rileyism.
But it is interesting, I was just having lunch with somebody who would be considered at the top of the food chain in bucket number one, the fund or stockbroker, stock manager, advisor. And we were talking about my previous career and how I got to Totum. And prior to this 2 or 3 year window of my life where I was in a very intense doing deals, meeting lots of people who were doing deals, I don't think I knew how simple it really is once you're in that network of people who do deals. It is fascinating how quickly you realize that capital is not the problem. There is capital.
There's capital. It's always capital for good
Concept,
ideas.
location, and timing
Opportunity.
are the
That's the,
And the person who can execute. That's the thing that isn't written in there. You look for people who execute. There's a friend of mine who I'm invested in this thing right now. It's called Carbonara. Luke Panza. He's actually in Norway doing a.
Was he no weight?
He was no weight.
That's what I thought.
He's in Norway doing this, what I would call worldwide business. It's focused on U.S., Latin America, North America, Europe, but its application can be worldwide. And it's, he's an executor. He doesn't not do the right things to get there. right? Does he have stumbles? Sure. Does he do things wrong? Sure. But ultimately, he's the kind of guy who executes. So
Right.
when he called and said, I'm looking at it, I said, yes. He said, you didn't even let me finish. I said, yes. What do you want to, like, just tell me what you're looking for. I'll find a way to get it done. Because I know he executes, right?
Right.
My brother Charlie's the same way. If Charlie says I'm going to do this thing, I just say yes. I ask the details later. I figure out whatever I need to figure out. But there's certain people that when you bump into them, you realize that if they are involved in something, they're going to put their energy behind it. You want to be on that train. Now, will they always be perfect? No. Right? Will you lose some money? Sure. But I feel like more often than not, you'll win. And that's your goal is, if you can hit enough decent sized singles, doubles, triples, that'll make up for some strikeouts. That's okay. We're into metaphors.
And sports metaphors,
Yes.
you're killing it. Yeah.
How do you decide what's palatable in terms of in any given investment? Like, is it a percentage of your net worth? Is it a percentage of what you think? Do you have just a bucket where you say, this is to go play with, and if I lose it all, that's okay? Or how do you think about...
I hate losing money.
Okay.
He's got 7 kids.
I haven't met anybody who liked losing money just yet in my life.
The determination is
Like
based,
Luke called and said, I'm doing this
carbonara.
carbonara.
God, I'm getting hungry for carbonara.
How do you decide what's
Well, it's available cash.
acceptable?
Available cash drives it first,
Okay.
right? So if you're low on cash, I don't care how good the idea is, you might be frozen out.
Yeah. First of all, is it a field you can play in?
Right, right.
Yeah.
So I've been called on deals I thought were really good deals, but they had $5 million minimums. I was like, well, sorry, I don't play that big.
Have you ever borrowed money?
No.
No. Borrowed money to invest.
So one of the lessons I learned in the bankruptcy experience was debt kills you.
Okay.
Because when you absolutely need that bank, they go, oh, so sorry, Mr. Dolan. We just can't find that paperwork anywhere. So sorry to all my friends at Big Bank, but I don't trust you guys when you are necessary at that moment, right? Because
Right.
time has shown me that for all the other investors I've watched and studied, right? And that's not necessarily a slight against them. I understand that. They're like, hey, you're going down. I don't want to go down and chase that down.
Right. Throwing good money after bad.
Throwing good money after bad. So available cash is a big part of it. And then the second part is, I just generally call it risk tolerance. Do you look at it and say, okay, how likely is this to be successful? What's the hurdles between here and there? You got to get this to happen. You get that to happen, and well, that has to happen. And who are you competing against, right? And when you start to see that, I mean, what's really fun is things you can find that have few competitors, a relatively cheap and easy path to the market, and a good executor. Okay, now you start to get a package where you go, okay, this might have a possibility. That is sort of, it's not a scientific approach.
Right.
That's really
It's a gut.
more. Well, I don't even know if it's a gut. I think that's just the true element of risk reward.
Yeah.
It's the beta. What's the volatility? Let me identify everything I know that could be good. Let me identify everything I know that could be bad. And then the thing I'm really dealing with is, what don't I know?
And I'll bounce it off people who I think might have input. So if it's a real estate question, I'll ask you, does this look ridiculous?
Right.
Right? And you can usually give me a quick, no, that looks ridiculous, don't do that. And there's other people I know in different avenues where I'll bounce it off and just say, what do you think of this? Is there anything here that I should be running, screaming from? Or do you go, okay, could have potential, right? Because I learned long ago, I'm definitely not the smartest guy in the room. And so I try to learn from what everybody else has learned before and leverage that to my advantage. Because most people will answer one question for you for free.
Yeah.
They'll do it. They'll say, yeah, no, I know that guy. He's a cheat. Or I know that guy. He's a good guy. Well, right
That's
there,
a start.
that can drive you yes, no, real fast.
So that is an interesting one. How important do you think the reputation is?
I think you don't have much else.
Yeah, it's everything.
Yeah.
Because we could all sit here and everybody listening to this podcast can sit here and think about 3 people that they wouldn't ever give $1 to.
Right.
Just wouldn't do it, right? And you can think about 3 people you'd be like, yeah, I'll give them my last dollar. Or maybe my second to last dollar. But those people all exist, and reputations. What's the old line? It takes forever to build it and 2 minutes to lose it, right? So, we talk about part of the game as a father of 7. It's part of my sales pitch sometimes. People go, well, how do I trust your company to do the thing that you say you're going to do? The world's a small place that I play in. I said there's only 300 some potential customers. And I tell them I'm a Catholic father of 7. I have no interest in going home and having to explain to my wife and children why I did something wrong. It's not part of how I want to spend my day.
Right.
So I'm on a podcast talking about it. It's
Right. So this will probably be the last question I think on this topic, but how important is what's known as like the OM, the offering memorandum? Do you even read it?
I do. The more important question is, do I understand it? They're so long and legalese and regulatory, right? That you have to look for certain pieces of them. One of the ones, some of the people use things that are called safes that Y Combinator did out of California. Those are easy because they're standard form.
Okay.
And so if you read one, they're all the same. So sometimes you can learn a lot by just reading one. Other times, like when I invested in the the storage units business, if you read one, all the rest of the deals are going to be pretty similar. You can turn to the certain sections and understand, okay, what are the
What's
criteria,
different, right?
What's different? And you get a cadence once you start to understand them. The ones that are, if you can't understand them, then you shouldn't invest in it, right? If they're starting to be, well, I don't know what that really means. That just sounds like a great idea. And if the guy's last name is Ponzi, you just want to avoid that, right? But people get caught up in things. I mean, look at Lordstown Motors over in Ohio, right?
Is it still called that? Or
I
did
don't
they
know,
change
but
the name again?
that was the one that
Yeah.
came to mind for me.
Sure.
Right? And look at all the crypto things that went upside
boy.
down real fast.
Right.
Right? And what's it? Is it Tether right now that's supposed to be, since 2017, I think it was, Tether's supposed to be providing their audit. It's going to be just a few more months. Just you wait.
5 years. No big
Right.
deal.
So, like, at some point you go, well, that's bullshit. Right? And you don't put your money there. That's okay. You got to be discerning. That's one of my lines I use sometimes. Like, everybody discriminates. We're all discriminating. Those type of discriminations, right? It's a bad idea to put my money there. You put your time here,
Sure.
right? So you're saying this is worth my time. That's okay.
This has been awesome. What do
You
you
make
guys
that,
have?
and you make that decision of time all the time.
All the time.
Okay, is this worth working on?
Yeah, I
If
made
it's
the
not
decision
worth
to come
working
here and
on,
do
if it's
this.
not- If you have that question going in,
We're
it's
very
just like-
grateful too.
because there's going to be another one coming in.
Well, and if you aren't super jealous of your time, no one else will be. Right? They will all take your time, and they will pay you very little for it, and you'll sit there at the end of the day and go, "What did I do today?" Right? There's an old story about J.P. Morgan. I think it was him. Someone said, "I'll give you this secret if you pay me $10,000." And he said, "Okay, well, I'll pay $10,000 if I like the secret." And he said, "Write down what you're going to do every day before you start the day." Some story like that, and he paid him. And that's a little stupid habit that I have. Is every morning when I sit down, I just have a yellow sticky note and I write down, okay, I'm going to try to do these 3 things today. Don't always get them done though, but it helps me go, because we've all sat there at our desks and go, what am I supposed to be doing right now? Right, Michael?
I'm looking forward to that day.
Well, but someone
Right.
walks in, interrupts you, and you go, what was I doing?
Right.
Oh, okay, I could at least have that to bounce back to, other than the 12 things on my computer screen to think about. So,
What was that line? If you're not jealous of your time, nobody else will be.
sure.
Was that? We're gonna get that up on the board. I like that one a lot.
Well, I mean, think about my perspective. I have 7 kids that want time with me every day. Mm-hmm. Right? So if I don't cut you off at some point from talking to me on the phone, or cut that person off from my email address, or just put my phone down, I don't get to them.
These
Right.
get hijacked.
Right.
Right.
So my duty is to raise them. That's my primary duty. After that, everything else sort of falls in line.
Sure.
So,
So my takeaway from what you've said, and let me know if I'm misquoting or missummarizing, but
you're hoping I remember. This is good.
no, like a general theme that I'm getting from what you've said today is you really invest in people rather than companies or stocks, or you invest in the people that have the expertise that will get your money to where you want it to go?
I would say you're misquoting that you're focusing on one thing. It's a habit of culture these days to focus on one thing as the reason for something. My add on to what you said is people's part of it, but there's always more to it than just one thing, right? You want to look for the facets of something to understand it from multiple angles, right? So like we started with this question of why has cost gone up for certain things.
Right.
There's always more than one reason, right?
Right.
But the headline,
There's always one thing.
the headline
One
we live
thing.
in is always
Just one
this
thing.
one thing drove it up. And it's
And
Oh my
this one
gosh, with
person
these
did
two,
it.
it's like the best. It's always just that
No,
one
no,
thing.
it's just, that's what grabs you, the sound bite.
Right.
That has nothing to do with the story.
right. But that is always the flaw in our society, is that we don't understand that everything comes from a lot of things, right?
And your the 3 points that the gentleman you said that you look to a lot for this, he said location, timing, and
Concept.
concept.
In real estate,
And
yeah,
then
it
the
makes sense.
person driving.
Well, and that can be part of those three different things. But yeah, that's the person driving to me is when you see an operating business.
Right.
Location, timing, and concept is around a real estate investment sort of purely. He was applying that in high-end resort development that we were doing. So you got to massage it to the different things you're looking at depending on what it is.
Yeah, when
Yeah,
I
I
hear
think it
concept, even
transfers.
if it's people or even if it's an operating company, the concept is the humans or the
What need are they solving?
yeah, what are they solving
And the
for?
location is
Right.
just the situation in
The universe that it's in,
universe that
right.
it's,
Well,
yeah.
as an example, like, if a business came up for sale today in New York State, I wouldn't buy it. I wouldn't invest a single dollar in New York State because they're conceptually they aren't in favor of business, right? Now, if it came up for sale in Pennsylvania, maybe a little more interesting. Came up for sale in Tennessee, definitely interested, right? Because there's a scale I look at there and go, okay, those states are growing more for a reason. These states are growing less for a reason, or shrinking. And so those sort of simple macroeconomic things can drive some of that stuff.
Makes sense.
I love when I can make all
What
three
about
of you go like this.
Portland, Oregon? Are we investing?
I have a family member that lives out there.
Sorry, Portland.
And I'll
You got great beer to shoots.
I have a family member that lives out there, and I have two family members who have moved from there in the past 5 years. And
We have a client who just sold all their real estate there.
right, and it's not an attractive package right now.
Right.
Right, beautiful city.
God, are you being kind?
No, it has.
It's not an attractive package.
Yeah, it has. But it has. Have you've been there?
Yeah,
Yeah, it has beautiful parts to it.
yeah.
Right?
They
The
have
hotels
found,
down
they
the
have found a way
waterfront?
to take Utopia and turn it into a cesspool.
That's
It's
podcast.
probably
We're
a
off the
little bit more
rails.
candid.
All right.
It's not an attractive package.
So in conclusion,
We had the moment. We had the moment.
Coopers.
The quiet moment. We could have wrapped it up. Someone made eye contact with Michael, and here we are.
and here we are. So what's your take on the bourbon?
I actually liked it. That's
It's
really
been
not,
so long since I've tasted
yeah, that's
it.
really not. It's
Where'd it come from?
a
I
very
think it's
good
a-
question.
It says
I don't
Cooper's.
Louisville, Kentucky.
It's Louisville. It's a Brown Foreman.
I thought it was boring.
Uh-huh. It's okay.
Yeah,
How is it
just
boring?
Okay. There's
I
just
think
nothing
their
to it. It's just
their
boring.
hook is that they make their own barrels.
Why does that matter?
Who knows?
Oh,
This
the
is
barrel
a
is
boring
what
one.
makes the bourbon.
I know,
Do you
but-
remember how much it
But
cost?
couldn't you buy a good barrel?
Do you remember how much
You
it cost?
could, but
I
if
think
you
it was like
control
$30
the
bucks.
growth of the
It was
barrel
not-
from how it was made and what kind of wood it is and how it's aged and burnt and so on and so
Wow,
forth, it's
boy.
going
It's
to
the
have an
charring.
the
A lot
charring
of
of
the
the
charring
barrel.
of the barrel.
So are you buying or selling?
effect. Oh, this one, I'd pass on it just because it's.
Sorry,
it's,
Coopers. I'm a seller too.
No, there's too many other ones in that price point that I'd probably.
Yeah, we know we like that. What's the one we need to ban from this office?
Bradford?
All smells like Saturday
Bradshaw.
morning in college to me.
Bradshaw.
Bradshaw.
Boy, you
In the $30 a bottle price point, Michael's Bradshaw all day and twice on Sundays. 3 times on a Wednesday night if
When
he
I was
doesn't
in
have
college, we
anything to do.
never got to the bourbon. It was just a little bit too pricey.
Yeah.
Well,
Of course,
I don't mind it. I like it.
so you're a buyer.
Yeah.
Bryn Mawr will do that to you. all right?
I wore it today just to, you know.
I like
Show
that.
up.
I'm a big spiritware guy.
You are Mr. Spiritware. It has been awesome having
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Yes,
so much.
thank you for
This is
joining us.
great.
This was really
Thank you
wonderful.
so much.
Appreciate
Should we
your
get Michael
time.
in trouble enough?
No, this
No,
is
Oh, we
very
could have gone
intense.
down so many
Not even
rabbit
close.
holes.
I have already decided that the podcast is always going to have a guest because it keeps the turmoil in the room way off.
He brought up a
table.
topic at lunch today.
Yeah.
I didn't.
No, yeah, you did. You brought it up, and instantaneously, the temperature of our lunch table
We had to leave the restaurant. 'cause the
very
temperature in the
spicy.
room-
I enjoy the debate.
The debate's fun.
So we got it out of our
The
system
conversation
earlier.
that I want to have with you, and obviously it's going to be offline,
Offline.
is the American education system. which
Steve Jobs. Steve
I-
Jobs said it should be voucher based.
That's a wrap.
All right, well, cheers to episode what? 12?
Episode 12.
Episode 12.
Thanks for coming.
Cheers.
First,
Thank
yes,
you for having
thanks,
me.
Brian. We appreciate
Thank you
it.
for coming.